In 1894, a high-class house was built at 152 Putnam in Detroit, Michigan, and it was a home for a nationally famous actor known as Owen Stanley Fawcett, who would basically have a 50-year career on stage in the country, and I say that he should be considered more important to entertainment history in Detroit than almost anyone else. The house had 3 stories and a basement, and it was made of brick and stone. Owen Stanley Fawcett died on February 22, 1904. Over the following decades, the building had ties to other things related to entertainment in Detroit. For example, in around 1940, when the building was a boarding house, a real radio engineer lived at the place with his wife. By the way, on August 1, 1920, the street address was changed by the city of Detroit to 672 Putnam. Between late 1967 and late 1985, the building was the location for a student-run radio station at Wayne State University, and that radio station was called WAYN-AM. I spent about 6 years in the building as a student at the university from September 1971 to June 1977. Around the time that I left the university, I decided to gather up a bunch of photographs that were stored in the general manager's office, thinking, based on my knowledge of the students who were then at the station, that the photographs would be forgotten and thrown away. This video shows history of the radio station through the photographs that I have kept safe for decades. I shot some of the photographs, and a number of them show me, and I am not showing all the photographs of me to sell me. The photographs are the only things that exist that I can use to show history. I now show a drawing which I did, and it is the best that I can remember for the floor plan of the radio station in about 1976. It may have slight errors, but that is the best that can be shown based on my memory. Incidentally, this is the first floor. The second floor, at least in the 1970s and 1980s, was the office area and such, and the third floor was a condemned area not used. Here is a look at one of the on-air signs that existed in the station. There was one at, in essence, the door to each of the 3 studios that existed in the 1970s and 1980s. In the 1960s, it seems that the radio station only started out with 2 studios, Studio A, which was the main on-air studio, and Studio B, which was the production studio and probably a news studio. A third studio existed in roughly the 1970s and 1980s, and it was Studio C, or the news studio. This photograph shows Studio A at some time between late 1967 and September 1971. The studio is in the front of the house, and a user is facing the back of the house. Behind the curtains is Studio B. I do not know the name of the young man. I can report that from left to right, you can see a Tapecaster audio cartridge playing machine, which is a model 700-P, an Electro Voice 666 microphone, an audio control board, an Ampex 601 reel-to-reel tape machine, and a turntable, which seems to be a Gates brand unit. Here is another photograph of Studio A. It seems the young man is Robert Wunderlich, who for one spent time as the music director for the radio station, and he went on to be involved with the record company business. This early photograph of Studio A shows a young man named Howard Waxer. The control board was made by members of the radio station, and it was a wonderful piece of equipment to use, since it was easy to use. I found out who was instrumental in putting the control board together, Tom Coleman and Ken Christopher, and so I call it the Coleman-Christopher Audio Control Console. In 1975, a man named George Carrigy, an engineering student at the university, reconditioned the control board. Here is a look at the reconditioned console. Oh, the sliding things are officially called faders, but I often call them sliders. In the early years, the turntables had what are called Shure tone arms, and I now show an example of such a unit. And I now show a stylus or pickup unit for the original tone arms, which would be replaced by other units in the early 1970s. This photograph was taken in March 1972, and I am shown in Studio A, and at this time the studio is now facing the street. During the 1972-1973 school season, this photograph was taken. It shows Jim Mikowitz, who went on to be involved in, for instance, selling commercials in the television business. At Jim's back, you can see a small rectangular unit. It is an intercom, and it is a Talkaphone Model T-L5-10. From left to right, you will see two Gates brand Criterion 80 cart machines and a VU meter. Of course, you can easily see the two turntables and the telephone, the main number to which was 577-4200. I now show two photographs from May 11th, 1976. At this time, Studio A is facing roughly west. To my left is the south or the street. The studio has the second set of turntables and tone arms. This photograph shows Ken Kalzinski, who called himself Ken Cal. Ken Cal went on to be the play-by-play announcer for the University of Michigan hockey team and then the Detroit Red Wings hockey team. He did that work in the period from the late 1900s to the early 2000s at least. Oh, the second set of turntables were QRK models, and here is an example of such a machine. I now shift over to Studio B. This photograph shows the studio from Studio A, and at some time between late 1967 and September 1971. The studio, which is a bit hard to see in this photograph, is beyond the Studio A, Studio B window, and you can sort of see the audio control console and other equipment. The studio faces the back of the house. And beyond the equipment in Studio B is another window, and beyond that window is a work area, or what is like Studio D, where people could set up microphones for a group of people, and their presentation could be recorded in Studio B or sent out live. In November 1976, this photograph was taken of Studio B. From left to right, you can see the Ampex reel-to-reel tape machine, an audio control board, which is a Sparta Model A-20, an International Tapetronics Corporation recording and playback tape machine, and two turntables. I took this photograph for a sales brochure, which was designed to show off parts of the radio station. You can see, from left to right, a Scully 280 reel-to-reel tape machine, a Sparta audio control board, the Ampex tape machine, 3 cart machines, and 2 turntables. By the way, for the photograph, I grabbed the cart machines from Studio A and placed them in Studio B. Okay, I fudged reality a bit. The young man is Rick Kloss, who for a short while in the middle of the 1970s was a disc jockey at WDRQ-FM in Detroit. Here is an example of a Scully 280 tape machine. Here is a rough example of the turntables that were used in Studio B in about 1976, but this turntable is not actually one used at the station. Here is a look at the clock and the timing clock that existed in Studio B. Here, Billy Martin sits in Studio B and in front of an Electro Voice 666 microphone. And here I am in Studio B in the spring of 1975, and the image was taken from, roughly, the door leading into the studio. Okay, I have this nutty photograph. It shows Studio B, as seen from what can be called Studio D. you can see the inside of the Ampex 601 tape machine in the studio. I now jump over to Studio C, or the news studio. I do not have any photographs that show right inside the studio. At the far right and in the background is a teletype machine. In the 1970s, the station received news copy from the Associated Press for a while, and then from United Press. Here is another shot of the teletype machine area, and I seem to be reading something, or it is nothing more than a dummy shot. This young woman is Irene Futiak, who seems to be getting ready to do a newscast. She is in the news work area, facing Studio C. By the way, the news director's office is not shown in this video. It was located in a room that was to the left of the teletype machine. In the work area, there was an Olympia SG-3 typewriter. I state that on July 2, 2022, I bought such a machine at a community garage sale up north in Michigan, so I have one. It would have gotten destroyed if I had not bought it. Let us pretend to look in the Studio C. The reel-to-reel tape machine inside was an Ampex Model 350, and it was at the right of the person sitting in Studio C. And it existed in a homemade cabinet thing, which was made of unpainted pine from maybe a 1x6 plank. Here is an example of the control panel for an Ampex 350 tape machine. In Studio C, the audio control board was a Sparta A-15-B, and I show an example of such a unit. Also, the studio had a cartridge tape machine, and it was a Tapecaster Model 700-RP, which was a recording machine and a playback machine. That covers the studios, so I jump upstairs, and I show a portion of the second floor. The photograph was taken at some time between late 1967 and September 1971, and it shows a jock meeting, it seems. I now show this photograph, and while you look at it, I report that I have a PDF-type document and a text document that provide a lot of history about the radio station, and the PDF-type document shows a few photographs that are not presented in this video. For a short while, the radio station had a van, as you can see. In the van here is Wendell Lee Davis, and this photograph was taken in 1974. This image shows the covers of 4 styles of music guides for the 1970s, and the one at the lower right was designed by me in the middle of the 1970s. I have a few photographs of people who were at the station. This photograph shows, from left to right, a guy whose name I cannot remember, Mary Beth Zolik, Kurt Schneider, and Paul Manzella. By the way, the photographs that I am showing with station members are from the middle of the 1970s. This photograph shows, from left to right, Ed Blackman, Gary DeSantis, and Mark Emge. This photograph shows Paul Manzella and Barb Cusack, the latter of whom was a newscaster for many years, such as in Detroit. This photograph shows Paul Manzella and Michael Schuff, who called himself Michael Lawrence, such as at country music radio stations in the southwestern United States. This young man is Tony Petta, and the photograph was taken when he was the general manager in the 1970s. And this photograph group shows Raymond Parker at the top and Reggie the Rapper. In late 1985, the historic Owen Stanley Fawcett House of 1894 was abandoned, and the radio station moved to another location on campus. The famous house was going to be torn down, and something new was going to be set up. This photograph is probably the last ever taken of the historic Owen Stanley Fawcett House of 1894. Notice the radio station sign is now gone. I contend that the historic Owen Stanley Fawcett House of 1894 was and is more important to Detroit entertainment history than the two Motown houses or the United Sound Systems House, since the house had ties to entertainment from 1894 to 1985. It is not that the United Sound Systems House and the Motown houses were and are not important to entertainment history in Detroit, but the historic Owen Stanley Fawcett House of 1894 had a longer history. By the way, the Owen Stanley Fawcett family line of entertainment history goes back to the late 1700s in England. And that is my look at the historic Owen Stanley Fawcett House of 1894, and my look at WAYN-AM 860 of Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan in the late 1960s, the 1970s, and the early 1980s.